everyone, and welcome to this episode of the ELT CPD podcast and an extra bonus episode of our Teaching to Writing mini-series. As we received such excellent feedback from our previous episodes, we wanted to do a fourth and final show in this series. In our first episode, we looked at how to get paid for your teaching materials. Then we moved on to how to write for a publisher, and our third episode was a panel discussion with 3 experts about sustaining a freelancing career. Today on the show, we're talking to Rachael Roberts, who provides life, career and business coaching to ELT professionals. We'll be discussing the mental side of both teaching and freelancing.
Hello.
Hi Rachael, how are you?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Good. Yeah, good. Let's start by hearing a little bit about yourself.
So, where to start? When you've been in ELT as long as I have, it could take a while. I've been in ELT just over 30 years now. As a teacher trainer, materials writer, manager, and more recently I've been working as a life, career and business coach with ELT professionals. So, I didn't really even plan to go into teaching. I think probably like quite a few people. But once I did, I found that I really loved it.
Yeah.
And in some ways, maybe even a bit too much. Because, I found quite quickly, I think, that I was working very long hours. And I sort of got to the point where I was working like maybe 50 to 70 hours a week, traveling around the south of Poland, going to different schools every week. That was my first experience of burnout. That's kind of what led me on the path a very long time later towards the work that I do now.
Okay. So did you continue teaching after you'd been working sort of 70 hours a week in Poland, and was it a while after or?
I came back to the UK and got a job in a further education college, setting up a CELTA centre. And actually that was absolutely fine for about 18 months. And then my manager left and I got my arm twisted into taking over. And that was also okay because I had learned a bit at that point and said, I can't do any of the funding or any of that kind of stuff because I know nothing about it. Yeah. So we split the job up so that I didn't have to do that. And then the person who did do that went on maternity leave just before an Ofsted inspection.
Oh, no.
And so once again, I found myself burning out. So, in response to that, really, I realised I had to kind of make some changes.
Definitely.
And obviously, I'm not letting either of those employers off the hook, frankly, but it was also changes inside me. Why was I agreeing to all of these things? Why was I not saying no? Why was I so concerned with being perfect? All of this kind of thing. And that eventually led to me doing a diploma in counselling and psychotherapy about 18 years ago. And I did use it in my work, but I didn't use it professionally, if you like. And then about 4 years ago, I kind of realised that actually I wanted to work with people more directly. I really like materials writing, but you don't see that direct impact.
Yeah, definitely.
So, I went back, did a coaching diploma and set up my coaching business.
And when you say you realised that you had reached burnout, what were the warning signs that sort of triggered you to feeling like that? And how can someone recognise that in themselves?
Well, I think, it's quite idiosyncratic and it is different for different people. And that's one of the problems because it tends to happen to people who are very kind of passionate and hardworking and capable, if I can say that about myself. And they're used to being able to do a lot. Yeah. And kind of, not struggling. And it's like, there's that metaphor about if you put a frog into a pan of hot water, it'll jump out straight away. But if you heat up the water gradually, it'll stay there until it gets boiled alive. Nice image, but anyway. So it is a bit like that you can kind of be so caught up with what's happening and too busy to think about what's happening. And, but there are things definitely to look out for, I think. Just things like if you don't respond well to like quite small challenges, so like your partner leaves their sock on the bedroom floor and you're, yelling, that kind of thing that normally you'd be able to take in your stride,
Yeah.
and you can't.
Okay.
Like, that's often a sign, I think,
Yeah.
because you're just too full. If you keep getting ill all the time, you know, minor things like colds and that kind of thing, but that's a sign because your immune system is depressed by stress.
Yeah.
Attitude changes. Like, you know, if you get very cynical, where, you know, I mean, if you've always been cynical, that's fine. But, you know, if you weren't, and then you get very sort of disengaged,
Yeah.
that's often kind of like your mind trying to protect itself, I think, in a way.
And do you think that both teachers and freelancers can get burnout, or is it mainly teachers, you think?
I think both, because I mean it's a bit like with my situation. It's usually a combination of sort of, you know, employers. I mean, if you're a freelancer, you still can have employers, but being unreasonable. But it's also about you kind of not wanting to say no to things.
Definitely.
And going. I mean, we all want to go the extra mile sometimes, but, you know, this is like going the extra 500 miles on a regular basis, you know?
Yeah. So I guess it comes down to time management, really, doesn't it? As a freelancer, really. I mean, as a teacher, maybe you don't have so much control over that. But I think for freelancers, often we assume going from teaching to freelancing that we're going to reduce our hours, whereas actually we might end up working more, as you say, taking on things that maybe we assume we're not getting work for the next month or 6 months, so we take too much on. So what are some of your time management tips? How do you think that freelancers should better manage their time?
Well, I mean, I think there's two aspects to time management, you know. So one is simply taking on too much, and it's really tempting as a freelancer because, you know, there's always this sort of, oh, will there be anything else?
Exactly.
You know, so I do think it's really important actually to be willing to take some risks in that way, and to kind of trust that there will be something else, rather than loading yourself up all the time.
Would you say that goes for less experienced and experienced freelancers?
Well, I mean, obviously it's easier the more experienced you are to be able to trust that. I think, however, you can build up, you know, I think you need to, this is another thing, you know, that often happens, is that people are so busy doing the work that they're not actually doing any networking or marketing or, you know, anything that will bring in the next work.
Yeah, exactly.
And actually you really, really have to set aside time for that. I think that's so important to see that as part of the whole business, because if you don't, then you are creating a situation where you might not have any other work, and then that puts the pressure on.
Definitely.
You know, so yeah, so that's one thing. And then the other side of it is actually managing the time you've got. And again, you know, I think for a lot of people, actually, they don't really have much clue how they're really spending their time. You know, so that would be my first thing. I think it would be to actually do a bit of a time and motion study on yourself.
Just writing down what you spend your time doing, or are there any specific tools that you personally use?
Well, I mean, I use Toggle, which is a desktop app, which will, I mean, I think a lot of freelancers know about it because it's a way of recording the hours that you do if you're being paid by the hour. But actually, I'm almost never paid by the hour, not for writing work anyway. So, but I use it because it enables me to see where my time's going. And it can also be quite useful for negotiating as well, because if you're recording the hours and you get to a certain point in the project and go, hang on a minute, you know, like this is really not working out in terms of the fee, sometimes there is room to renegotiate on that. Or if not, at least the next project, you can say, well, you know, something similar took me 500 hours. Therefore, you know, perhaps you need to up the fee a bit, that kind of thing.
And is that a free resource for freelancers to use?
Yes, I mean, there is a paid version, but there's a totally free version. I mean, the only difference is that it doesn't organise the data for you quite as helpfully, but it's perfectly useful. I don't pay for it.
And you just input the project that you're doing.
Well, it does it automatically. Once you set it up, so you just kind of click what you're doing. I mean, the first time you have to type it in, but after that you just choose from the menu. And then as long as you are moving your mouse or the keyboard, it will record that you're doing it. And if you stop, it will then ask you after about 5 minutes, are you still doing this? And if not, it'll stop.
That sounds like a really, really useful tool. Yeah. So you mentioned networking, but I think sometimes it's hard for a freelancer or even an online teacher who's trying to find their own students to put themselves out there or to get noticed or just to network with people if they're not very self-confident. So what could we say to someone? What advice would you give someone who's not very self-confident and tries to sort of avoid doing these things?
Well, I mean, I think you're right. Probably the majority of people coming from a sort of ELT background are not necessarily the kind of people that, you know, feel totally comfortable with shouting about what they do, you know, because teaching, you don't have to. So, you know, I think to a degree we do just have to get over ourselves.
Yeah.
And I don't find it particularly easy, actually, either. And there's Helen Pritchard, who's like a sort of LinkedIn guru, talks about using your effort finger when you're posting online. Right? But she doesn't use F, but you know what I mean. But I really like that because it's like, yeah, okay, I feel uncomfortable about it, but I'm just going to press post anyway. And also, a lot of people don't realise that, you know, they have this idea that when they put something on social media that everybody that they're connected to is going to see it. And that's not the case at all. I mean, I wish in some ways, you know, but it's, you know, it's often only about sort of 3-5% of the people that we're connected with will see a particular post. And those who do see it are likely to be the ones who consistently like and engage with your posts. So they're not going to feel annoyed about you posting. They like your posts, you know. So just knowing that does make people feel a bit better, I think, sometimes.
Definitely. And I also think you have to separate yourself from your online persona in a way, because like you said, we're not standing in the street talking about ourselves like we're the best. But online it's a different situation, is it? Because that's the way that sometimes you have to be in order to get work. So
yeah, absolutely. And also, you know, seeing it the other way around. You know, so if you're a writer, publishers are always looking for somebody who can help them with the project that they're doing, you know, so they're quite grateful if they find somebody.
Exactly.
You know, so you're not doing them any favors if you hide away in your room wondering why nobody's contacting you.
Coming to you, exactly, yeah. Yes. I think in ELT we often hear about sort of imposter syndrome. So can you explain what is meant by the term, and then what advice would you give to someone dealing with that?
Yeah, so this is something definitely, I think, particularly, I mean, it's not a new term, but I've noticed it a lot more in the last few years, I think. And the idea is that, you know, it's when we are actually perfectly capable of doing something, probably more than capable, but we feel that we've only really got to where we are by luck, and that, you know, we may be uncovered as actually not being as good as people think we are, and, you know, all of this kind of thing. And I do use the term imposter syndrome because people generally kind of have an idea what it means. But I don't really like it because, you know, syndrome implies that there's something wrong with you if you have it. And actually, research shows that like 70% of us experience this at, you know, one point or another, or many points. You know, it's quite normal. And also, you are more likely to experience it if you are sort of in a situation where, trying to think what the way of phrasing this, you know, where you have to try a bit harder to prove yourself generally. So if you're from sort of a minority, for example, you know, same thing would apply for women, even though they're not actually in the minority within ELT, but they feel they have to try that bit harder. To prove themselves. So, you know, quite a lot of it isn't just about how we feel internally, it is about the reality of the situation that we're in, you know. So I don't really like pathologizing it, I suppose, is what I'm saying, because it's quite normal.
Yeah, definitely.
But in terms of sort of what to do about it, really, you know, I think it's the same with a lot of, you know, negative thoughts or lack of confidence. We all have this like sort of little voice in our head. I like to call it the inner troll, you know, that tells us, oh, you know, you can't do that, and who are you to do this, and, you know, you're bound to get it wrong. Or, I mean, everybody's inner troll says slightly different things because it's usually based on what we've kind of internalized as children. But what they have in common, you know, is that they're all sort of quite nasty and want to put us down. And at a certain level, that has a sort of biological function of keeping us safe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you don't kind of put your head above the parapet, then you're not going to die.
Yeah.
But it's also often just complete nonsense,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so I think recognizing that, we all have this voice. It's not actually us. It's kind of like, almost like, sometimes it's referred to as like a record playing in an empty room. You know, it will just pop up and say these things, but we don't have to actually believe it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a phrase, don't believe everything you think,
Yeah.
and I think that's quite helpful.
It's hard, isn't it? Because I think it's one of those things that people don't really like to say out loud. I've felt it. I'm sure maybe you felt it. Most
Of course,
freelancers, yeah, because it's quite an isolating profession that we're on our own and we're in our heads a lot of the time. So apart from saying it out loud, how else can you sort of deal with the thoughts that you're not good enough? Would you say sort of writing it down, or just, I don't know, what would you say?
Well, journaling can be quite good, actually, because once you kind of get it onto paper, that enables you, I think, to sort of step back.
Yeah.
And rather than seeing it from the troll's perspective, if you know what I mean, see it more from like your human self,
Definitely.
if you like, and and analyze it in that way, and you can then see it. Actually, that's a bit. Do I really believe that? That's a bit ridiculous.
Yeah,
I think also just talking about it, actually, because the more you realise that loads of us feel that way, the less ashamed you are about feeling it, and that takes away a lot of its power as well.
Absolutely, yeah. We had a question from a listener, actually, which is related to this, and it was, as a freelancer or even a teacher being observed, sometimes it's difficult to take criticism or feedback. So I guess that adds to the imposter syndrome, doesn't it? Because if you do get criticism or feedback saying you could have done something better, or on your materials that you've written, for example, which is inevitable as a materials writer, maybe you take something personally. So the question was, do you have any advice for how to stop taking things so personally in terms of criticism and feedback?
Well, I would say that there's a difference between that instantaneous reaction that you get, which I personally think you can't really do anything about.
Yeah.
Because, I think it's just a natural kind of gut punch reaction.
Definitely.
And, I've been getting feedback on my writing for 12, 13 years now. And, I can't say that I ever look at critical feedback and don't have an initial, like, oh my God, reaction,
Yeah.
But there's a difference between that initial reaction and then what we choose to do next.
Yeah.
So, we can choose to hang on to that reaction and to turn it into a great big story in our head. And this is where the troll gets involved, all about, oh, well, obviously they think I'm really useless and that I'm not as good as my co-author, and that, and 9 times out of 10, if not more, we've just completely invented all of that. And I actually experienced this earlier in my writing career. I did a whole project with an editor who was a very good editor, but who basically just didn't believe in giving praise, because it was a bit of a waste of time. So they just focused on the things that needed changing.
Yeah.
And I went through the whole process thinking, oh God, I can't do this. I'm useless at this. And, and then got to the end. And this person was really like, oh, that was so great, and you're really good. And I was like, oh, God, well, you could have said that earlier. So I had been telling myself all of these stories about, oh, you obviously can't write secondary materials. And, and it was just all totally in my head.
Yeah. So in that case, it was just waiting until the end of the project to get the praise. Yeah. I think often freelancers don't, especially materials writers, don't get praise. Like you would send a draft 1, get your feedback, send the draft 2, and then the project's finished. So do you think it's okay to ask for feedback at the end of a project?
Yeah, I was going to say, what I would do differently now is much earlier on, I would ask for feedback and just kind of, not in a sort of, do you think I'm rubbish? Please reassure me kind of way, but just genuinely like, what would you say are the things that I'm doing well here? What are the things that in general I can improve, and just not spend the entire project, because it was over a year, thinking that I can't do it. And just bear in mind that you can't control what somebody else thinks of you, which, we all try to, but you can't. You can control how good what you produce is, so obviously you try and produce the best you can. But ultimately, even if it's true that they don't like it, you can't actually do anything about that other than do the best you can do.
Exactly. So I once read a post by your group, which we'll talk about in a moment as well, by your Life Resourceful group, and it said, maybe you're a people pleaser. You find it hard to say no. You rarely put your own needs first, which often leads to taking too much on and being overloaded. So it's sort of related to the time management that we were talking about earlier. I think it is the case for so many people who are in charge of their own schedules, taking on too much work. What advice or tips would you give someone for that? Just taking on, when is it okay to say no?
Well, it's always okay to say no. Is the first thing. And I think there are reasons why people don't want to say no. So one of them we've talked about already, which is like fear. Fear of not getting any more, or fear of offending people, that kind of thing. But I think also sometimes it's about, shoulds, like I should be able to do this. Other people would be able to manage this, that kind of thing. And sometimes it's we don't want to let people down, and I would put that in quotation marks, if I was writing it, because a lot of the time, actually, we are letting people down worse by taking it on than we are by not taking it on, because, we probably won't do such a good job. And worse than that, I think what tends to happen, and I've definitely done this myself, is the resentment kind of bubbles through. And even if you don't say anything directly, they can feel it, like in the tone of your emails or, this kind of thing. And potentially you can damage the relationship.
Definitely.
So I think there are really good reasons to say no. And just in a broader sense, because often these people have trouble saying no, to family and friends and everything else as well. It can damage that sort of relationship. It can teach people to be too dependent on you, which is not necessarily in their interest. And ultimately, I guess if you get ill, the publisher may not care that much because they can hire somebody else, but your family certainly will, and they'll be left picking up the pieces. Definitely. So it can actually be quite selfish to never say no to things. And for people who have a horror of being selfish, which is certainly me naturally, actually that's a good reframe, because then it can kind of pull you back from feeling that you ought to be saying yes.
And if you're in the middle of a project and it just gets too overwhelming and you think, I can't do this, and like you said, maybe it starts to come through in the work that you're doing as well, do you think it's okay to reach out and just say, I think this is too much, and sort of maybe try and get someone else on board to help?
Yes, again, I think you're not doing them any favours, just kind of struggling on and not producing anything very good, possibly going off sick at the last minute when they can't get somebody else in. Whereas if you can make a positive suggestion, like if you have somebody you've worked with before who has a bit of availability, and you can say, how about if I asked so-and-so to do, a couple of units if it's writing, then all the better. But I do think, being sort of, transparent and honest about things is usually the way to go.
Definitely. And I think there's always an internal worry that, this is too much work for me, it's overwhelming, I don't want to do it, I'm not getting paid enough. But then the battle of, if you reach out and say that to a publisher or the person that you're working for, you're afraid that they're just going to cut you off and never speak to you again. Whereas that's not necessarily the case. We always have in our heads how someone's going to respond to something when that's actually not usually the case. So
well, it's that thing about telling ourselves stories again, isn't it? Like me telling myself for a year that this editor thought that I was rubbish.
Exactly. So I've got a couple of listener questions here. So especially now during the pandemic, a lot more people, especially teachers, are now working from home. So how can we stop working from home becoming living at work?
Good question. Yeah. So, I hear this a lot, and, in some way, I work from home and have done for about 12 years now. And, I love it, but I've got it all set up for that purpose, I've got a separate office, with a door, with a sign on it that says closed, like if I don't want to be disturbed. Whereas for a lot of people over the pandemic, they've been kind of working in their kitchen or, so it's a totally different thing.
Yeah.
But I think the similarity comes down to, the same thing, which is boundaries. And again, this goes back to the not saying no, but being really clear about, what is and is not okay in terms of being disturbed, being clear in your own mind about what are your working hours, because actually a lot of people, I think, are working much longer hours, because they can.
Definitely.
And they're not commuting, so they think, oh, well, that's an extra, couple of hours I can do a day. Whereas actually maybe you should be using that time to get outside and do the walking you'd normally be doing if you were commuting,
Definitely, yeah.
So I think, in boundaries is probably a really key part of my work, actually, in one way and another, whether that's practical things or emotional things.
So what if someone can't, say they are working in their kitchen, for example, and they find it really hard to switch off from their environment around them? What could we say to someone like that, especially a teacher who might have sort of children running around and washing up lying on the kitchen counter?
Well, I mean, I think as far as you can, try and avoid, those kinds of things, even if it means, like getting up earlier so you can do something before the kids get up, or, but then not working the entire day, then actually perhaps putting aside your work and spending some time with the kids, or having a nap if there's somebody to watch them. But, sometimes we are in this kind of situation. I mean, it's been, a bit like that for me this year, where you just have got too much on. And with the best will in the world, you can't improve the situation that much. And I think, in those cases, it's about seeing that, recognizing that that's really a challenging situation, and therefore you need to really up the self-care. And I don't just mean bubble baths, but eating properly, getting exercise, sleeping, and having rests and breaks and things, even if it's just 1 minute with your eyes closed, doing some deep breathing. Everybody can fit that in.
Definitely. Do you know any different ways of working rather than sort of sitting for 8-hour days? One that I've used is the Pomodoro technique, where you do sort of 25-minute sprints of work. Of course, that's not for everybody, because 25 minutes might only be enough to get going. But yeah, do you know any other ways of working that might be useful?
So, well, I mean, certainly Pomodoro is one that I use quite a lot if it's something that I'm resisting doing, because it's hard to procrastinate. And actually, I'm amazed what you can get done in 25 minutes.
Definitely.
If you're not messing about. I think, this is, I don't know if it's exactly a way of working, but I think a lot of it is about being more conscious about how you're feeling. So what can happen quite a lot of the time is that we're so busy working that it's almost like we're a head, like floating about, in our body. We've just got no awareness at all. And suddenly, we stand up and we're half crippled because, well, maybe that's just me, but, because we've been sitting for so long. Or we suddenly realise, we're really thirsty, or, that kind of thing. So one thing that I teach my clients to do is to have like a regular, like maybe every hour, something pings on their phone, and they just check in with how they're feeling. So I get them to do, like green, amber, red. So green, feeling great, in flow, can carry straight on. But if it's amber, then maybe you need to stop and kind of take a short break, or have a drink, or move before it gets to red. So the idea is that you never get to that red point, because you're aware of what's happening.
That's really useful, actually. And would it just simply be writing down the colour as
I
feel?
Yeah.
Interesting. That's really, really useful.
It's a kind of mindfulness technique, I suppose.
Yeah, it's really, really useful. And hopefully no one gets to the red and they're writing down red. And the final listener question we have is, sometimes it's hard to know how much time a project will take and if it's worth the money I'm being offered. How can I better manage this to ensure I'm not selling myself short?
Another good question. I mean, unfortunately, there is not some, I mean, I'm sure you'd agree probably, Billy, because you're a writer too. There isn't some magic formula that always tells you exactly how long something's going to take. You get better at it
Yeah.
with experience. And I do think like using Toggle has helped me a lot with that, because I go back and look at, well, how long did I spend on something like this last time?
Yeah,
You know,
definitely.
having said that, it does vary because, you know, I mean, I wrote, you know, 2 levels of a book at one point, and the difference, I think it took twice as long on one of them as the other, and it was about the editor.
Wow.
You know, so you never quite know.
Yeah.
But what I would say is don't be too hard on yourself if you get it wrong, and you've learned from it, and you can use that in the future. Bear in mind that you may well be able to negotiate after you started, because I think people often think that they are absolutely tied to it.
Yeah.
And I've made that mistake myself. I mean, one of my first freelance writing projects ended up working out about £5 an hour.
Wow.
It was horrendous. But I never complained. I never went back and said, no, but you know, you didn't say it would go through all of these. They kept giving it to different people to read, and then they all had different opinions. So you can go back. You could also do the first section, you know, say to them, I'm not quite sure how long this is going to take. Can I do the first unit? And then we can talk about how long it will need. Although, of course, the first unit will usually take a bit longer, but it'll give you, you know, an idea.
Definitely. And I think it's always hard for freelancers to negotiate. Yeah, how do you know when it's okay to negotiate?
Well, I mean, I can't think what the exact quote is, but there is quite a well-known quote which basically says you always negotiate on everything. Right? You know, and to a degree, I think that's right. It doesn't mean that that you're necessarily going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
But there's always room for negotiation on something.
Yeah.
You know, so it might not be money, it might be time, it might be scope, you know, like how much you have to do.
Yeah.
But there's usually some kind of room for negotiation. And sometimes I think fees are definitely, you know, quite fixed.
Yeah.
But sometimes they're not. And like what they've got in their mind is between this and this kind of figure. You know, so if you don't ask, you don't find out.
Definitely. And I think that again goes back to being in your own head. Knowing that you want to negotiate, working out how you're going to say it in the email, and then panicking because you think they're going to come back and say, I hate you and I never want to work with you again.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. But it's also about, you know, the situation that you're in, because how strong is your position? You've always got to think about, I mean, you know, negotiation is one of my favourite topics in some ways, because I've learned quite a lot about it over the years.
Yeah.
When I went freelance, my husband actually teaches negotiation at university, and he was kind of like, right, now I'm going to teach you all about this because you're going to need it, you know. Yeah. But you've got to think, you know, what's your walk away point, and how much do you need this, you know? And if you really badly need it, then it may not be worth trying very hard with the negotiation, because you've always got to be willing to walk away. If, on the other hand, you really don't fancy it and or you're really busy already, then you can be a bit cheeky and give it a go and see, you know, well, how much would I want to actually make me want to do this?
Definitely.
See if you can get it, you know.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit about your Life Resourceful group, because you've mentioned it a few times, but where can people find out about it, and what is it?
Yeah, so I have I've got a free group on Facebook. It's called Light Bulb Moments. Helping ELT professionals manage stress and gain balance. And the idea is that tells you what the group's about.
Yeah.
So essentially, yeah, so it's a group of 700 odd ELT professionals who, you know, are all interested in having more balanced lives, you know, personal development, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I do a live every Monday, just sort of like 10 minutes or so, usually with like a sort of thought for the week, if you like. Yeah. We also have regular guest lives, you know, people coming in. So we've got somebody coming in soon to talk about managing your finances, because that can be a cause of stress for people.
Yeah.
And then next month, we've got Mariusa Price, who's just published a book about mindfulness activities in the classroom. Nice. So, you know, so it varies quite a lot. Anything that comes under that umbrella of better quality of life, really.
Nice. Do you do training as well? You do on your
Uh,
website for your training?
I do sort of like ELT related training,
Yeah.
and conference speaking. I do quite a lot of that. I also do, so as well as doing like one-to-one coaching, I also have a group program, which is aimed specifically at freelancers.
Nice.
And that's like a combination of business skills. So things like, marketing yourself, negotiating, finding your niche, that kind of thing, together with things like imposter syndrome and, money mindset, as in feeling guilty about asking for any. So it's that sort of, the combination of the business skills and the psychology, because, essentially that's what I've found that people need. Yeah. You can find out a lot of the business information if you look around, but you won't necessarily implement it if you don't get over those blocks.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's one of those things as well that people just don't generally like to talk about the mental side of freelancing and teaching and working from home. And everyone's going through it. So I think that's really useful that your group gives people the opportunity to share their experiences as well and know that they're not alone in what they're going through. So
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a key part of it.
And how can people find out about your group and the dates that you run it?
So I'm running one at the moment, which is going through to July, and the next one will be in September. And you can find out by going to my website, which is life-resourceful.com, and just click on the tab that says group program. Yeah, and there's quite a lot of information there, and sort of, testimonials from people who've done it and that kind of thing.
Great, perfect. And we'll put a link below the podcast as well so people can access it from there. So I've got a quick fire round. We tried this on the last episode and it worked really well. So I'm just going to say some sentences and then whatever comes to mind super quickly, the first thing. So 5 alternative ways to take a break in your day are...
Okay, so first of all, one thing I've really got into lately is yoga Nidra, which is not yoga as in exercise. It's a kind of nap, basically. So it's great. So you listen to this voice and you focus your attention on different parts of your body.
Okay.
And you don't actually fall asleep, but really close.
Okay.
And it's incredibly refreshing. If you just kind of do that for 10 minutes, it really picks you up.
And you do it lying down?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, preferably lying down. I mean, you can sit in a chair, but if you're a freelancer, you don't have to.
Yeah.
You can go and lie on a bed,
Exactly.
But do set an alarm.
And is it just on YouTube?
Yeah, you can find lots of them on YouTube. So, yeah, I definitely recommend that. It's really good. Dancing would be another one.
Okay.
So I quite often do that, just kind of put on some music and, have a bit of a boogie in the office because that gets the energy level back up again. And I like dancing and nobody can see me, so that's all right. I mentioned the traffic lights idea. That would be another one.
That's really good.
Deep breathing.
Okay.
Actually, because often if we're anxious, we breathe very shallowly. And so we're not kind of taking in enough oxygen. Yeah. But you have to be a little bit careful because if you kind of pant deep breathe, you can actually make things worse. Yeah. So a good technique is what's known as box breathing. Okay. So kind of you breathe in and then you hold it at the top and then you breathe out and then you hold it at the bottom. So I'm kind of drawing a box with my hand, but of course nobody can see that. But it forms like a box, so in, across,
definitely.
Out, across.
That's a good suggestion.
Various mindfulness techniques, I think, can be good as well. So just, going into the garden if you can, or looking out the window if you can't, and just spending, 2 or 3 minutes just really focusing on something that you can see, like a tree or,
Yeah, just to take your mind off staring at the screen or what you've been focusing on for the last few hours. Definitely.
Absolutely.
No, they're really good. Okay, the next one. If you get offered a job that you know is paying too little, you should...
I mean, this goes back a bit to what I was saying about what choices you have, but I think the first thing is to ask yourself how realistic it is, that fear that you won't get anything else. So is that actually a real thing, or is that your troll kind of getting into your head? And if it's the troll, then I think, tell it to wrap up, basically.
And when you start to get overloaded...
and this does happen to me from time to time, and what I do is I write it all down. Like make a really sort of big list of everything, which initially is a bit like, oh dear God, right? But then I go through it and kind of work out, right, okay, what do I realistically not actually have to do or not have to do now? And what can I delegate to other people? And just kind of get as much of it off there as possible. And then think, okay, which of these things have to be done soon and which can be done a bit later. And usually by that point I'm kind of calming down a bit about it. Because when we're really busy, I think we do get into that can't see the wood for the trees thing, and we think everything's important. And it rarely is, actually.
Do you find it helps, or would you recommend people to tick things off the list as they've achieved them?
Yes, I think that can help. I mean, generally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of to-do lists per se, because they can be a bit overwhelming.
Definitely.
But I do like that sort of just dump, like it's almost more like a brain dump than a to-do list, And then I think I would take the things that are left on there and put them in to sort of decide when I'm going to do them, like block them out in my diary, rather than just have them in a list.
And the final one that we have is the key to being, actually we'll do two, one for teachers and one for freelancers. So the key to being a happy and successful freelancer is?
Okay, so for this one, I think it's recognising that you are literally your own boss and asking yourself what kind of boss you want to be.
Okay,
like,
nice.
A good one, or the boss from hell.
That's true, actually. I've never really thought about it like that, because you are your own boss. So if you had people working for you, how would you be the boss to them? You should treat yourself exactly the same way.
Exactly. And very often when you look at it, you think, dear God, I would never treat anybody else like that.
That's really useful. And then the key to being a happy and successful teacher is?
Okay, I think again, it's similar in a way. It's about recognising that you are at least as important as your students. Because I think often teachers will sacrifice themselves in many ways, for their students. And nobody's saying that, that students don't matter, but there has to be a balance.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for answering the questions. You've given us some really useful advice. And as I said, we'll put some links to your group and your Facebook group as well, so that people can join that too.
Okay, thank you.
So thanks so much for listening to our episode today. We'll be posting links to the resources Rachael mentioned along with this episode, so do check those out. Our next podcast series is focused on all things digital. So from setting up an online teaching business to growing your subscriber numbers and followers and developing content and apps for both teachers and the classroom. Do follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram by searching for ELT-CPD, all one word, to hear when our next episodes are released. And you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, ELT-CPD. If you do have any suggestions for our upcoming episodes or would like to be a guest, just send us an email and get in touch at info@eltcpd.com. Once again, thanks for listening and see you next time. Bye!